The 20th floor should have been empty. Fluorescent strips hiss over the marble. Desks sit like islands in slow motion. Elevators sleep. Jack Rowan moves through them with the practiced economy of someone who has learned to be invisible. Shoulders down, eyes low, the mop like a metronome at his side. His uniform is a dark hush. His shoes scuff a careful rhythm against tiles that remember 1,000 shoes that never needed mending. A single photograph peeks from the inside pocket of his jacket. A boy with a crooked grin and a smudge of jam on his cheek. The corner of the photo is worn smooth from the way Jack rubs it when he thinks no one is watching. Treatment bills are folded beneath the photograph, yellowing like a second, sad currency. Insurance turned it down. Loans have already eaten the margins of his life. The job keeps the lights on and supplies a roof. Everything else is on the ledger of favors and small, stubborn denials. He pauses outside a glass-walled atrium to refill his cart. The building breathes, the conditioned air warm, the wide spaces cold. Then something slips through the hum. A note. A single piano sound, hesitant and imperfect. The way someone finds a word they haven't used in a long time. It threads the silence and hangs there, thin as a filament. Jack freezes. For a moment, the janitor is a soldier again, posture straight, listening the way orchestras listen for a downbeat. He follows the sound like a scent to a doorway. Behind the glass, under the spill of a skylight, a grand piano sits like an island. And at the bench is a small figure, shoulders tucked into a jacket, head tipped toward the instrument in the way of someone leaning into a secret. The boy is maybe 7, maybe 8. His hands are sure, despite their smallness. His fingers move in a language Jack has not spoken aloud in years. A worn leather bracelet is clasped around his wrist. Jack recognizes something about the way the boy attunes, an economy of motion that says he has practiced listening to the world the way other children practice spelling. The boy's eyes are closed. Jack doesn't announce himself. He watches, which is new for him. The boy plays a fragment, a melody cut short by an omitted bar. It is familiar, not a song, but a space where a song wants to breathe. Without thinking, Jack steps forward, slides onto a stool, and lays a hand on the next key, quietly finishing the phrase. It's a small completion, nothing theatrical. The note is the final note, and it steadies the fragment into something whole. The boy's fingers pause. He smiles, surprised. "You know it," he says, the words bright and factual. They are the kind of sentence that contains none of the people-pleasing caps that adults use. He says his name softly, Lucas. Jack's voice comes out rough from lack of use. Jack. There is a small exchange of measures. Jack plays a chord, Lucas replies. A duet without score. The atrium holds them. Glass and plant and the distant city traffic that sounds like another instrument. For the first time in many years, Jack's chest loosens, as if a hand has unknotted a knot he did not know was there. He glances at Lucas's wrist. The bracelet has an engraving, faint and worn. "Here with your heart." "Where's your dad?" Jack asks, already knowing the answer will shape him. Lucas shrugs. "He works nights. His mouth tightens, then opens into a practical admission. "We don't have enough for the treatment yet." The way he says it is not a plea. It is a factual ledger, the sort of information children keep like marbles. Jack's breath tightens. The treatment, sparse words but heavy, hangs between them with the rest of the unreality he has learned to carry. He nods, adding nothing to the weight. If this story is the kind you keep near your heart, subscribe, so more stories like this find room to be heard. They begin to meet in the empty hours. Jack returns the next night, then the next. Lucas practices scales as if he is building a ladder. He counts the spaces of sound, maps them with his hands. He describes chords like the color of a room. "A soft blue," he says once. "This one feels like rain." He teaches Jack to listen in a way that is not about hearing, but about noticing, how the damp of the west-facing glass makes low notes taste different, how the echo of the atrium rounds out a minor third. Jack tells Lucas small, half-true stories about his past. He admits he used to play in a military orchestra, that the uniform once fit him different, that music was a profession, not a hobby. He never says the word wife in the beginning. Names are heavy, and he chooses them late. The silence is generous with grief, and the music is the first place he meets himself without ceremony. Lucas learns to play by ear. He hums the trains outside the building as if they are metronomes, and can transform a hum into a melody with a closed fist. He corrects Jack once, not with scorn, but with an amused patience. "You're holding back," he says. "Stop worrying the notes." Night after night, their ritual forms. The atrium softens. Jack's mop is a memory of rhythm. His hands, once precise with varnish and baton, relearn a different economy of touch. Lucas is not a passive recipient. He invents little challenges. "Ask me to play this without looking." And when Jack clumsily fails, the boy laughs and asks the same question again, as if Jack is the one enrolled in lessons. Between lessons, the cost of Lucas's care presses at the edges. Jack sits at the kitchen table and scribbles numbers on paper that look like tiny fighting fish. The clinic called again with a polite regret. Insurance sent a form full of boxes. Jack touched the photographs without opening the envelopes. He begins to take overtime shifts whenever they offer them, cups of vending machine coffee glued to a throat that had not learned to unwind. The bracelet becomes a talisman between them. Lucas presses Jack's thumb against the engraved phrase like an incantation. "Here," he says, solemn the way a child bestows a crown. "Here, with your heart." On one winter night, while snow makes the city soft and muffled, Jack hears the atrium keys in a way he hasn't felt in years. The phrase they practice becomes a motif, 3 notes that Lucas begins, 2 notes Jack returns. It is small, but it shapes the nights, a pattern of call and answer, the way 2 people give each other a map to cross. Not everyone sees the map. Richard, the building manager, is an efficient man whose life is also measured in small accounts. He notices deviations in the cleaning roster and files them away like irritants. He believes in order the way other men believe in God. When he finds Jack after hours at the piano, something about it angers him. "You know the policy," he says, voice low and brittle. "No employees in unsupervised spaces after lights out." Jack's first instinct is to diffuse. He covers with small words. I was just... He looks at Lucas, whose face is open and unafraid. The manager looks at the boy and then at the uniform. The equation is simple in his eyes. A janitor, a child, a disruption. He writes the infraction down on a digital pad as if it were a verdict. "It's not for you," Richard says finally, and the sentence is softer than he means it to be. But policy is a lever, and he pulls. The next morning, Jack is called in. The conversation follows the architecture of procedure: HR, paperwork, a review. The words are courteous but firm. Violation of after-hours access constitutes cause. They place a final notice on his file. Mercy in corporate language is a type of accounting. Jack leaves because what else do you do when the ledger has spoken? When he steps into the elevator, his hands are empty for the first time since Lucas learned to map sound. He goes home and sits with the bills and the empty bench at the piano. Lucas calls at night, voice small on the line, and asks if Jack will still come. Jack tells the boy to keep playing, practice like a promise, and he hangs up a little steadier than he feels. The firing is not dramatic. It is a small administrative excision. It feels, however, like a moral amputation. Jack knows the rhythm of the building. He knows the paths between rooms where people can't say what they saw. When he returns with a box of personal belongings, the atrium is cold, and the bench sits without companion. Lucas leaves a sticky note under the lid of the piano keys, a crude drawing of a smile and the words, "See you." Jack leaves. For a week, he walks like someone who has misplaced his own gravity. He takes on more shifts, 3 nights when he can steal them, each shift a coin tossed for a child's hope. His eyes get hollower. He tries to sleep during the day, but finds only the small, brittle sleep of men still listening for a note that won't come. The firing is not dramatic. It is a small, administrative excision. It feels, however, like a moral amputation. Jack knows the rhythm of the building. He knows the paths between rooms where people can't say what they saw. When he returns with a box of personal belongings, the atrium is cold, and the bench sits without companion. Lucas leaves a sticky note under the lid of the piano keys, a crude drawing of a smile and the words, "See you." Jack leaves. For a week, he walks like someone who has misplaced his own gravity. He takes on more shifts, 3 nights when he can steal them, each shift a coin tossed for a child's hope. His eyes get hollower. He tries to sleep during the day, but finds only the small, brittle sleep of men still listening for a note that won't come. Then, on a Tuesday that smells faintly of rain, Clara Voss comes to the 20th floor. Clara is a woman who has learned to keep a building in balance. As CEO of Helios Group, she moves through glass and strategy with the same clean efficiency as a conductor cutting through a score. She is often surrounded by people who measure themselves by their ability to anticipate her email. She is precise, brief, and, in public, impenetrable. Rumors about her kindness circulate like urban fable. They are mostly skeptical. The board thinks her sensible. But tonight, she has come for a different reason. A subsidiary report demanded her presence, and the floor she walks through is part of a city rhythm where meetings are sometimes late. She is tired in the particular way people who are always on duty are tired, a bone-level fatigue that does not admit of rest. She passes the atrium without intention at first, noting the piano as an ornament. Then a phrase wafts out. A small sequence of notes, half-formed and honest. Something about the interval trips the part of her that used to attend recitals with a child who grew older and busier. She slows, not from curiosity, but because the sound catches and will not be ignored. Clara stands at the doorway and watches without stepping into the light. The scene is quiet. A janitor and a child at a grand piano. A duet stitched together from absence. Clara draws the music close, like a tide. Jack is smaller in the light than a uniform should make him. He sits with his back to the glass like a man who is holding something fragile. Lucas leans into the bench, blind to the world but entirely engaged in it. Clara's hand goes almost by itself to the locket at her throat. She remembers a different kind of evening, a different kind of apology made in perfunctory flowers and calendar invites. She remembers the thinness of the time she allowed herself to spend, and the soft erosion of a relationship that politics and strategy and success can sometimes make. She has always been good at listening to numbers. Tonight, she listens to an incomplete melody that becomes whole because someone else reached across a silence. The phrase completes, and she feels a sudden corrosive guilt, as if a ledger has been turned and the columns reversed. Her first response is to freeze, frozen like glass catching the sun. Richard notices her. Men who measure power in policy rarely notice goodwill without calculation, and he squares his posture and assumes the necessary posture of the guard. "CEO Voss," he says, too quickly. "We were just—" "Who are they?" Clara asks simply. The question is an ignition. The story that spills out is small and simple. A janitor, a boy, an unauthorized use of space, a possible policy breach. Richard's version is the framed one. Clara watches Jack's hands on the keys, the way he closes his eyes for a second when he hits a certain chord. The boy speaks, not to her directly, but in the thick, sincere voice children have when giving weather reports. "We can't pay for the treatment." Hearing those words turns something in Clara like a key. She has staffers who will remind her of budgets and brand image. She has lawyers who will recite policy. But here, at this doorway, words have faces. She remembers the son she sometimes forgot to call. She thinks of a check, always written for the future and never cashed. Clara steps forward, not as a lightning strike of corporate redemption. She is smarter than that. She opens the door with care and lets the music fold around her like a cloak. The atrium is suddenly warmer. Richard gathers his phone, looks to his counsel. He is used to solving problems with forms. He is unprepared to meet a quiet human presence. Clara speaks, and her voice is careful and unadorned. "How long have you been doing this?" she asks Jack, with no accusation and no ceremony. Jack tells her, since the boy first found the keys, since the nights when the boy's father couldn't be there, since the one time he needed to be something he had not been in years. Clara listens, absorbing the details that numbers cannot translate. When Lucas says, plainly, "We need money for the treatment," the CEO's face changes in a way that is not melodramatic but irreversibly human. She looks at the bracelet, at the engraved phrase that might as well be an accusation. "Here with your heart." Later, when she talks to Richard, it's with the instrumented calm of someone who understands structure. She calls for numbers, but also asks for names. She asks who had been on watch and what experiences the building has with community initiatives. She notes the policy and asks, gently, whether policy has ever been allowed to become an excuse for not looking. The manager's defense, neat, procedural, rings thin. Clara does not make promises like confetti. She makes administrators move. She convenes HR and legal and the philanthropy desk in a string of decisive emails and phone calls. She insists on discretion at first, not for optics, but because discretion allows a human problem to be handled in humane terms. She asks to meet Lucas's father. She asks for medical records. She schedules a time to see the boy play without telling anyone else. When she meets the father, Mark, who works nights at a delivery depot and flinches at the idea of cameras, he hears the ledger of small failures that made the debt. He brings a file, a patient's advocate letter, a set of denial forms from an insurer. Clara looks at them as if consuming a new language. This is not drama. This is paper that describes limit. She does the only simple, radical thing she can. She authorizes the company's community fund to explore immediate coverage and to underwrite a plan for Lucas's therapy and training. Not by fiat, not cartoonishly, by applying the existing corporate foundations mechanisms to a case she has seen and now cannot forget.
Richard is reassigned. His reassignment is not a spectacle. It is a paper-thin apology that fits neatly into corporate structure. He moves to a role with less autonomy and more oversight. There is no public shaming. He files complaints and feels wrongly aggrieved. The company records the details and moves on. The correction is administrative and consequential. One small recalibration, like tuning a string. What changes more quietly is the public acknowledgement. At a company meeting, Clara steps to the podium and speaks without pretense. She tells the audience a story, not in full detail, but enough to make the point. Sometimes, she says, we make decisions that have human consequences beyond the spreadsheet. She announces a program, the Helios Community Strings, a pilot to fund music lessons and specialized therapies for children with disabilities in neighborhoods the company serves. She names Jack as a paid instructor for the program, a new position that uses his skill and gives him institutional support. There is applause. There is also skepticism in the room. People will always have both. But in the atrium that night, after the memo circulates, Jack sits back at the piano with Lucas beside him. The stool is steady, official. The bracelet fits Lucas's wrist like a quiet promise. Jack's reinstatement is not a magic wand. The company funds the start of Lucas's treatment and creates a scholarship for the ongoing care he needs: transportation, therapy hours, adaptive equipment. The treatment they fund is not pitched as a cure. The doctors say it is a resource, an interdisciplinary plan promising stabilization and new possibilities, not miraculous reversal. The language is careful. The joy, therefore, is not one of redeemed miracles, but of possibilities brought back into reach. Lucas responds to therapy the way he has responded to music, with curiosity and stubbornness. He describes sounds as if they are rooms with wallpaper. He teaches Jack to hear the city as a score, the rhythm of a dishwasher as a timpani, the metallic clink of a train as a percussive accent. Jack learns to translate his old formal training into something lighter, more intimate. How to coax a melody out of the hum of machines, how to teach technique with a story. Weeks pass. The program grows quietly. Parents who were once only spectators become participants. Kids who used to sit on folding chairs now stand at benches. The Helios Fund is careful. Applications, checks and balances, caseworkers who do not talk down. Clara visits sometimes. No cameras, just an unglamorous presence sitting at the back of the atrium while a child learns a scale. She is changed in ways that no press release can capture, less by dramatic conversion and more by the daily discipline of seeing the consequence of policy as something human. The manager's removal reverberates. It is not a morality play, but a correction. Richard learns the consequences of assuming people have no more dignity than their uniforms suggest. The company reviews its after-hours policy and builds an access program for community use of otherwise empty spaces. The change is incremental. A new form, a new key card, a new understanding of what the building is for. The years that follow are not romantic. There are struggles. Lucas has therapy appointments that tax Mark's hours. There are moments of despair where the cost flares back like a bruise. But there are also evenings filled with music where the entire family sits in a small living room and listens to a motif that started as an after-hours duet. The bracelet remains. Once, Lucas helps Jack learn to recognize a certain combination of overtones by placing his hand on the piano lid and feeling the resonance. The reciprocity is simple and true. A boy teaching an adult to listen again. 1 year later, the City Theater fills. The Helios program has paid for a recital space and invites donor families, company staffers, and neighbors. The stage is deep red. The lighting is warm and precise. Jack stands in a jacket that fits differently than his janitor's uniform. Clean lines, not a uniform. He is not a celebrity. He is a man who has been given back a role that feels like equipment he had mislaid. Lucas sits at the grand on stage, his posture steady, the bracelet catching the light like a small quote. The audience hushes as he starts. The motif they worked on, those 3 careful notes, appears in the first phrase, a little signature that folds into a larger piece. Lucas does not perform in the way a virtuoso would. He performs with the precision of someone who has practiced the same weather pattern until he knows its storms. The music is not a cure. It is a demonstration of work and possibility. Jack conducts from the side. He shapes dynamics with small gestures and smiles that are private signals between teacher and pupil. Clara sits in the audience toward the front, her expression soft but concentrated, the result of someone who recognized a human truth and decided to act. There is a sense of an exchange that went beyond neat solutions, a corporate hand that learned to translate resources into relationships. After the program's finale, a piece that loops the motif into a larger tapestry, people rise. The applause is warm and sustained. Not the cloying kind reserved for spectacle, but the kind that comes from recognition. Parents clap with the particular fierce pride of someone who has watched practice rooms fill and emptiness shrink. Donors look at the faces around them and count something that isn't currency. Backstage, Lucas removes the bracelet and slides it into Jack's hand.
He watches the engraving with the concentration of someone reading a map. Here with your heart. Jack inspects the letters, and a private smile cramps his face. He thinks of the nights of fluorescent light and muffled music. He thinks of the debts that still sit on the kitchen table. He thinks of the man who answered to policy and the woman who decided policy could bend when necessary. He thinks of the small miracle of being seen. "Do you remember the first night you added the last note?" Lucas asks, voice low. "You made it sound less lonely." Jack swallows. He remembers the silence that came after his wife died, the instruments packed away like funerary cloth. He remembers the fear that he had become someone whose hands were only good for cleaning other people's messes. He remembers the day he returned to a key and how it felt like a confession. "Yes," he says finally, "I remember thinking I was done with making music, that it belonged to a life I didn't have anymore." Lucas's small face creases in a way that shows understanding. "It's still ours," he says. "Music doesn't belong to anyone. It belongs to the people who listen." In the audience, Clara watches them. She thinks of a ledger opened and rebalanced, of a child who could be helped because someone decided the numbers were not the only truth. She thinks of the way policy can become armor, and of the way armor must sometimes be taken off. The program continues beyond the applause. Helios oversees scholarships and creates an advisory board that includes parents and staff. Jack's position evolves into a director role, part instructor, part liaison, part chronicler of the small human stories that corporate structures usually miss. Lucas enrolls in the months-long therapy plan the fund now covers. The treatment is a door opener, not an eraser. It gives him tools, technology, therapy, lessons that widen options rather than promise a miracle. In the quiet of his kitchen that night, Jack pins the bracelet back on Lucas's wrist. The engraving is a small, constant punctuation. "Here with your heart." He thinks about the fragility of systems and the sturdiness of attention. He thinks about how a simple, unauthorized duet had been a seed. There are bills still stacked under the daily bread. There are nights when worry comes back like a recurring part in a play. But there is also a rhythm now that Jack did not have before. Paid work that uses his gifts. A child whose world is expanding. A company that, for once, learns to be quick with resources and slow with judgment. The last image of the concert is not the applause, but a close-up of Lucas's hands on the keys, a battered bracelet catching stage light, and Jack watching like someone who has been given back the right to be seen. If this story moved something in you, consider subscribing, so more small human stories find ears to be heard. If you can, share it with someone who believes in the quiet power of music. And if you are able, support local music education or organizations that provide arts access for children with disabilities. Often, that simple help is a hinge on which futures turn. Sometimes, a single note in the dark is enough to call someone back. Sometimes, a silent visitor at a doorway is the pivot between policy and mercy. And sometimes, a bracelet with only 3 words, "Here with your heart," reminds us what it means to listen long enough to be changed.